Hello, good evening. Britain's transition period out of the EU will probably be extended. The words of European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker at the end of the EU summit in Brussels. Theresa May said the negotiations would always get tougher as they approach their end. But tonight she is also facing claims that she backed down when talking to the Irish government, admitting the so-called Irish backstop couldn't be time limited. Sky's political editor Faisal Islam reports.
From Merkel to Macron, European leaders hit town till the early hours without Theresa May after declaring insufficient progress on Brexit talks and politely but firmly putting the blame on the Prime Minister not invited to Brexit beers. So arriving at the summit with no hangover from the Brussels nightlife, but certainly so from the Brexit negotiations, the EU27 shelving a November deal summit, the PM putting a brave face on it, quoting fellow leaders, saying, where there's a will, there's a way.
We've made good progress both on the withdrawal agreement and on the future partnership, our future relationship. On the withdrawal agreement, there are issues remaining around the backstop.
She gave a confusing account of why she had discussed a longer transition period at last night's meeting. It was an option to try to unlock the logjam on the Irish border.
What has now emerged is the idea that an option to extend the implementation period could be a further solution to this issue of the backstop in Northern Ireland.
And Ireland was the issue again. Irish leader Leo Varadkar had brandished a copy of a newspaper showing the 1972 bombing of a customs post to the EU27 dinner. And both Mrs May and the Taoiseach did not deny the idea that the PM had reassured him privately that there would be no time limit on the so-called backstop plan.
We all recognise that it can't be time limited in the sense that it can't have an expiry date. It only comes into force if we don't have an agreement to supersede it, and it only ceases to be enforced when we do have an agreement to supersede it.
The Prime Minister didn't manage to join the Franco-German drinking buddies in their late-night aperitif in Brussels, but they are trying to give the Prime Minister some domestic political space at a time when she needs it. And she has reciprocated by offering up a longer transition period. The question, how much trouble is that going to cause her back at home? But as this summit was wrapping up, the French President Emmanuel Macron once again deploying an uncompromising message that the need for further compromise was solely an issue of domestic British politics. Isn't it up to you to compromise? Isn't it Calais that will be blocked, Mr. President? And that he was now preparing France for the elevated chance of no deal.
There is no political compromise, additional political compromise to be made on the European side, as now this is a British visibility to provide on the basis of this different technical scenario following their political compromise.
Not that all seemed well on the EU27 side. A heated discussion between European Council Chief Donald Tusk and top EU official Martin Selmayr. The pressure really is now on. The EU is giving the PM time to get beyond an immediate budget pickle. But we're now at the point where choices have to be made, and some at home will feel promises broken. Faisal Islam, Sky News in Brussels.
The prospect of an extended transition period out of the European Union, however short, has been met with frustration by Brexiteers in Westminster. Conservative Jacob Rees-Mogg described it as a poor attempt at kicking the can down the road. And there's fury amongst Remainers too. They've been told that there won't be an opportunity to amend any deal that the Prime Minister brings back from Brussels. Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Beth Rigby reports.
We negotiate in good faith and the Prime Minister has the Cabinet's full support.
Has she already agreed a transition deal?
Don't be silly.
This Brexiteer doesn't seem very keen on the Prime Minister being open to extending Britain's Brexit transition in order to unlock negotiations with the EU.
Good morning, Miss Mordaunt. Are you going to resign over Brexit?
And this Leave-supporting Cabinet Minister doesn't seem to have even got the memo, appearing to contradict her boss today.
This is not about extending an implementation period. This is about the rules within the implementation period. She recognises that we are going to leave the EU and we need to do that as swiftly as possible.
Another Brexiteer backlash brewing, with MPs furious at the prospect of Britain still sort of being in the EU 5 years after it voted to leave.
I don't think people were ever very relaxed about the transition period because that has always meant accepting EU laws, new laws coming in, without having any say on them. It is the vassal state for which we pay. And therefore, to make that an even longer vassalage seems to me to be an error.
Her room to manoeuvre narrowing as the clock ticks down. No deal this week, the November special council ditched. The crunch point for a deal now rests on the December summit, with Brexit Day, deal or no deal, set for the 29th of March 2019. Mrs May, desperate to unlock talks, now looking to extend the transition period beyond December 2020 for up to a year.
Brexiteers already hate Theresa May's proposed Chequers trade deal plan, and they see this as another betrayal from a Prime Minister in whom they now have very little faith indeed. But it's not just the Brexiteers, it's the Remainers too. They're furious at what they see as government attempts to try and bind their hands in any vote in Parliament on a final Brexit deal.
The Brexit Secretary writing to MPs informing them they'll have no chance to amend Mrs May's deal when it returns to the House of Commons.
The whole part of this debate was about trying to find a way in which we could resolve difference in the event of the deal not being satisfactory without precipitating a major political crisis. And what I find so extraordinary is that the government seems keen to precipitate a major political crisis rather than to find a way of resolving this.
MPs on both sides of the debate fast losing confidence in their Prime Minister, time running out for securing an EU deal, and a sense today that time could be running out for her too. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Outside the confines of Westminster, the anger at a protracted departure from the EU is also growing. 2/3 of the electorate in Nuneaton in Warwickshire voted to leave. And as Sky's Caterina Vitozzi has been finding out, many just want out as quickly as possible.
It's lunchtime in Nuneaton. On offer at this butcher's, prime rib, hot pies and a chance to grumble about Brexit.
Talking to my customers, I get the impression that everybody wants it done over and done with. We need to see something new on the telly and different words other than Brexit.
2/3 of voters in the Nuneaton constituency decided to leave the EU, a process that for many is now taking too long.
Has it been quite frustrating, this process?
Oh yeah, it has been, yeah. People don't know really what to do they? Some of them, so.
Not at all confident, because there's so much indecision, and I don't think people know what's going to happen at all.
From the butcher's block to the manufacturing floor, uncertainty is a word that gets mentioned a lot around here. This factory makes precision tools. Around 30% go to Europe, where managers say recently it's become a little embarrassing to do business.
I think we're a bit of a mockery at the moment. Even our own politicians can't agree, even within the same party. And so it's becoming a bit of a drawn-out exercise now.
Brexit might not be as fast and orderly as some Leave voters would have hoped for, but would they make a different choice if they could vote again?
If I could, I'd have voted Leave twice. We've been treated abysmally by people in Europe. I wonder if people who don't want Brexit to happen are really having it all their way at the moment.
So your thoughts on a people's vote?
We had one, 2016. So can we just honour it? And if not, why should we honour the next one? Or any other vote?
Bang in the centre of Nuneaton, this EU-funded fountain continues to flow, even as the Leave voters around it become increasingly frustrated at the direction Brexit is taking. Caterina Vitozzi, Sky News in Nuneaton.
Well, our Foreign Affairs editor, Deborah Haynes, is in Brussels for us this evening. So, Deborah, Theresa May is getting a lot of criticism from all sides. So how will she view the success or otherwise of this summit?
Well, I mean, it might not look like this from back home, but Mrs May most probably will be viewing this EU summit as a success, especially compared to the disaster that was Salzburg last month. I mean, you have to remember that she has received widely warm support from the EU 27, who, while they're all putting on a brave face about the difficult problems that they still have to overcome in terms of the Irish backstop, are all saying that they want a deal. Angela Merkel talking about how we're 90% there, and she very much wants that final 10% to be made. President Macron of France, he too, these two big leaders in Europe, both saying that they want a final agreement. But it's important to remember that for the EU 27, while Brexit is a huge issue, it's one of many big issues that they're grappling with. And this is reflected by the fact that Mrs May and the other 27 EU leaders are still here in Brussels tonight. They're meeting with 23 other leaders, including 21 from across Asia, including the Prime Minister of China and the Prime Minister of Russia. So you've got Medvedev sitting having dinner at the moment with Mrs May, along with everybody else, at a museum close to here. They're apparently going to be listening to a South Korean pianist playing Chopin. And it's all about the EU looking to its future. So while the UK is Brexiting, the EU very much has to think about where its future lies, and it's looking to make new deals. It's had a deal recently struck with Japan, it struck a deal with South Korea, it's going to be signing a free trade deal with Singapore. I mean, these are the lists of trade deals that Mrs May at the moment can only dream of. And so very much we've got a summit that's going to be continuing in tomorrow between the EU and Asia countries, looking at that relationship. And so that's going to be very much the focus of European ministers now that they've managed to get the Brexit bit out of the way.
Deborah, thank you. US President Donald Trump has threatened to send the military to the border with Mexico if neighbouring countries fail to stop what he's described as an onslaught on America. And tonight, Sky News can expose the gangs and drugs cartels working across as many as 9 countries to smuggle migrants from Asia and Africa into the US. The epic journey costs thousands of dollars and brings with it the risk of extortion, rape and even murder. Sky News has heard the stories of migrants whose journey to the US border started in India and continued on to Ethiopia. From Africa, they made their way to South America, heading north through Peru, Brazil and Colombia to Central America, eventually making their way to the US-Mexican border via Guatemala. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reports from Nogales in Mexico.
For tens of thousands of people, this is the final act of a journey full of drama and horror that's lasted weeks or even months and covered thousands upon thousands of miles. We've joined a people and drug smuggling cartel on the northern Mexican border with the United States. It's the first time they've let outsiders in, and it's never been filmed. On board, a somewhat terrified traveller is preparing to jump the border north. They want us to move quickly as the night closes in. This is a popular route with competing gangs, and they rent access to the border by the hour. In the red and white shirt is Pedro, a guide. They're known as coyotes, wild desert dogs who know the routes to the United States.
But is it quite easy getting over?
Pedro tells me it's not easy. There's surveillance cameras and border patrols everywhere.
Okay, we're getting near the border now. That's why we've gone into night shot. It's getting very dark out here. And they're very, very jumpy. They keep checking, seeing if people are coming, if anyone around. And it's not so much actually the authorities, but more other gangs. They start fighting amongst themselves.
The boy has paid $6,000 to cross. He hopes to change his family's fortunes back home, and they've stumped up the cash. They move forward. A quick wave, and they're gone. The wall, a dark line, a short distance away.
There's probably people around. We should go. Okay, we should go. Well, there are heat sensors on the... Go on. There are heat sensors on the fence, which is just there, which is why they won't let us go any nearer, but the guys have disappeared, and now there's other people, we think, coming, so we've got to get out of here. They didn't want us to get right next to the fence because we'd be seen quite quickly. But now it's time to go.
Then we're off. Another customer in a multi-million-dollar business delivered.
It's all right, actually, isn't it? It's all right, isn't it?
Over 1,000 miles south from the border is the Mexican city of Tapachula. It's at the centre of the people trafficking business, but it's a business that's changed. It's morphed into a multinational coalition of crime syndicates. This is where most new arrivals to Mexico come. People trafficking to the United States has gone global, and nobody knows how to stop it. One of the largest new travelling communities come from India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. There are 5 curry houses on this street alone. Each are paying between $30,000 and $50,000 to the smuggling syndicates. The new arrivals are greeted with an affectionate hug. Despite the VIP costs, the journey through 5 or 6 countries to this point have been horrendous.
Good evening. The Prime Minister is under sustained pressure tonight from different sections of the Conservative Party following the outcome of the EU summit in Brussels. Mrs May suggested that she was now prepared to consider delaying the UK's departure from the single market and the customs union after Brexit. That would give more time to agree a final deal and to find a solution to the biggest question of all, the future of the Irish border after Brexit. Some of the Prime Minister's critics say that extending the transition period could cost the UK billions of pounds. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, has the latest details.
The longer this rolls on, the more things stay the same. Europe's leaders frustrated in Brussels when Theresa May arrives with not that much to say. But listen carefully, very carefully. There comes a hint of compromise.
A further idea that has emerged, and it is an idea at this stage, is to create an option to extend the implementation period for a matter of months, and it would only be for a matter of months. But the point is that this is not expected to be used.
A tiny clue, but a big change. What she means is we might stick longer with the status quo after Brexit. Theresa May has reason to look a bit nervous about that. Longer in the departure lounge, in transition, would mean longer following EU rules without a say. And maybe these leaders would charge a bill of billions for the privilege too. They don't look worried. Instead of late-night brinkmanship, there was late-night beer drinking for Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron and a select band of other EU leaders last night. But will the idea of a longer transition make it easier to say Auf Wiedersehen to the UK? Maybe.
If the UK decided that an extension of the transition period would be helpful to reach a deal, I am sure that the leaders would be ready to consider it positively.
Maybe not.
The key element for a final deal is on the British side.
Number 10 believes, as Angela Merkel says, where there is a will, there should also be a way. Even if the idea quickens the pace in Brussels, it might get stuck at home.
We're negotiating in good faith. We'll keep our nerve.
The Cabinet's nervous.
It's very nice to see you. I'm just heading.
And whether former Leavers or former Remainers, it has really riled already fractious Tory MPs.
The most common phrase to me is just get on with it. And if this means more prevarication, more delay, not bringing compression to the Commission to actually make decisions, it opens up the horror of very large sums of money possibly being handed over because we get into the next European spending round. So it's pretty unattractive.
She knows her party may well try to kill her plans, but right now she hasn't many ways out.
There's a lot of hard work ahead. There will be more difficult moments as we enter the final stages of the talks, but I'm convinced that we will secure a good deal that is in the interests of the UK and of the European Union.
You've been straining in the last couple of years to keep all the promises that you have made, whether to Brexiteers, to former Remainers, to Northern Ireland or to business. Ultimately, you are going to have to disappoint someone. Who is it going to be?
What we have done as a government is put forward a set of proposals that deliver on the vote of the British people, that would ensure that we would end free movement, end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, end sending vast amounts of money to the European Union every year, come out of the common agricultural policy, out of the common fisheries policy, but also protect jobs and livelihoods and protect the integrity of the Union of the United Kingdom.
Theresa May has survived this far by making different vows to different sides, both here and at home, promising to keep the UK together, saying that trade won't be damaged even though we're leaving our biggest trading partner, saying she wants to take the best bits from Brussels without hurting the EU. But with time really running out, perhaps reality is emerging. It's just about impossible to keep all of those pledges. And if she breaks those promises, ministers are all too aware, that might break her.
It might be another 2 months before Theresa May's back here, if her compromises and her leadership gets that far. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
So let's talk a little more about this so-called transition period, or what the Prime Minister calls the implementation period. The UK is due to leave the EU on March the 29th next year. That is when this transition period would begin. And during that period, the UK's relationship with the EU would largely stay the same. The period is meant to end formally on the 31st of December 2020, and the government hopes that by then the new trade arrangements with the EU would be firmly in place. The suggestion of extending the transition period, however, would have quite a few implications, and it could include Britain having to contribute to the next EU budget, which is being set up, and that could run to billions of pounds, and that has angered many MPs. Our political correspondent Ben Wright has the story. There is some flash photography coming up.
British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
But it's clearer than ever, Brexit will not be easy or quick. More than 2 years on from the referendum, Brexiteers are furious about the idea of a longer transition period if there is a deal.
Well, I think it's a mistake, and potentially a very costly one, because we would be into a new multi-annual financial framework, a new budget set without the UK having any vote or any veto, very unlikely to maintain our rebate, and money is scarce.
Trying to buy time with an extension of the transition or implementation period wouldn't resolve the question around the Irish border.
And that's the issue at the heart of this. Both sides have agreed in principle there must be a legal guarantee there can be no new customs or police checks installed on the Irish border after Brexit. More time to sort a trade deal might ensure that guarantee is never needed. But Tory MPs who are not Brexiteers say the idea of a longer transition period is concerning the whole party.
There are ranges of emotion, but what underlies them all is dismay. This dismay at where we seem like we're going to end up. Now, a very large number of Conservative MPs of all persuasions, Leavers and Remainers, government loyalists and, tried and tested rebels, all of them want her to change track.
The mood among Tory MPs is getting ugly. The Brexit deal emerging is angering everybody. For some, another referendum is now needed.
But even if you believe in leaving the EU, what we are heading for cannot be what people expected. And the only way we can resolve this is by giving the public an opportunity to have their own say.
Around 80 Tories share the view of this MP. Although lukewarm about a longer transition, he doesn't want the party's divisions boiling over.
What we have to do is be sensible here, not panic, not blink. We have got to continue to aim for a negotiated settlement which honours the outcome of the referendum.
Even if Theresa May gets a deal with the EU, she then faces the daunting task of getting it through the House of Commons with no majority. And Labour's opposition to the emerging deal seems to be hardening.
The Conservative Party can't agree amongst themselves about what it is that they want to negotiate, and given that they can't agree amongst themselves, they can't negotiate with the rest of Europe.
When she gets back home, Theresa May will find no refuge from the criticism flying at her from all quarters of the Tory party. Number 10 is appealing for cool heads, but there are many here in Parliament who fear Britain is lurching out of the EU without a proper plan, and that is causing alarm. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, now, in a moment, I'll talk to Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor in Brussels, who's been at the summit, as, of course, has been our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Katya, I'll turn to you first. How would you characterise the view of the 27 other member states at the end of this summit? What is their perspective?
Well, it's mainly we're sticking together and we're sticking to our script. That was their main message for Theresa May at this summit. The leaders said, we want a Brexit deal, but you in the UK are going to have to make more political compromises, particularly over the Irish border. The other message from the EU that came through loud and clear, particularly from influential Germany and France, was that the UK should forget trying to woo or soften up individual EU leaders. Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron said, Michel Barnier is our guy. All 27 leaders are united behind him. His red lines are our red lines. That said, Hugh, EU leaders didn't want to put the UK off trying to make this Brexit deal at all. They tried to make encouraging noises. One EU diplomat I spoke to said that leaders and their entourages were tiptoeing around on eggshells, trying not to say anything that might go down badly in the UK. So we heard that a Brexit deal wasn't just possible, we heard that it was probable. Angela Merkel saying there, where there's a will, there's a way. But clearly, Hugh, we're not there yet.
Katya, thanks very much. I'll turn to Laura now. Laura, now that we've got this suggestion of a possible extension to this transition, or implementation as Mrs May calls it, where does she stand in terms of the plan that she is still trying to say is a credible one?
I think, Hugh, as ever, the first part of Theresa May's strategy is get through the day. She has a very restless political party at her back. She has no majority in the Commons, so every 24-hour cycle will almost inevitably have ups and downs. And it is just that sense of muddling through until the next day dawns. The second part of their strategy is, in the medium term, keep going. Just as Katya was saying, the important thing about this summit, which Theresa May has pretty much achieved, is a sense that it's not doomsday. This process can go on. It has not yet been smashed to bits up against a brick wall. But do not underestimate the levels of anxiety amongst MPs in Westminster at home. You know, we've been able to feel it screaming across the channel to Brussels here. And important to note, very much, the worry in the Tory ranks is not just among grumpy Brexiteers who think somehow the government is headed for Brexit in name only, somehow they're selling out. There are people in all shades of opinion in the Conservative Party who have genuine concerns about the way Theresa May is handling all of this and about where the end point might be to her attempts at making a deal. Our viewers will know, for the last 2 years, the backbenches and many prominent Brexiteer voices in the Tory party have been extremely willing to make life difficult, to shout from the rooftops about what they're not happy about. But I think now, as we enter into what may well be, at last, the closing stages, life is only going to get more bumpy. And if you think that Parliament has looked difficult for Theresa May, we may not have seen anything yet.
Laura, once again, thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg there for us, and Katya Adler, our Europe editor, both in Brussels.
Good evening. 24 hours ago, Theresa May's idea of extending the Brexit transition period, the time between leaving and actually going it alone, seemed her best offer to try to break the deadlock on agreeing a deal with the European Union. Well, that was last night. Today, after anger back home on her backbenches at the notion of staying in the EU any longer than necessary, there was a clarification by Mrs May. Others might call it a none too subtle rowing back. The compromise of yesterday did, though, win some approval in Brussels, a warming of relations, if not exactly progress on the detail.
Last night, Theresa May was talking to her fellow leaders about a possible extension, maybe a year, to Britain's transition out of the EU. That did not go down well back home, so this morning there seemed to be an urgent need to row back. Not a year at all, she said, much less.
A further idea that has emerged, and it is an idea at this stage, is to create an option to extend the implementation period for a matter of months, and it would only be for a matter of months.
By the time she held a press conference this afternoon, the backpedalling had gone further still. Her party in Westminster deeply unhappy. The line was that Britain wasn't really proposing an extension at all. With every compromise you make at these talks, the transition extension just being the latest example, doesn't it become less and less likely that your party will ever be able to get behind this deal?
What has now emerged is the idea that an option to extend the implementation period could be a further solution to this issue of the backstop in Northern Ireland. What we are not doing, we are not standing here proposing an extension to the implementation period.
So it's not a year, not a few months, it's now just an option for an extension that London doesn't actually intend to use. In which case her fellow EU leaders may now be wondering why she raised it before dinner last night at all. Despite no one being sure where a breakthrough is coming from, they are at least getting on better than they were last month in Salzburg.
What I can say today is that we are in a much better mood than after Salzburg. And what I feel today is that we are closer.
And while everyone insists that a catastrophic no deal won't be allowed to happen, the French government have just published their no-deal plans and say it would have been irresponsible not to.
I'm sorry, I'm not the one who voted for Brexit. So Brexit has consequences. But we have the responsibility to be sure that the day after, in case of a no deal, everything will be organized with due processes.
Press conference is over. This summit moved, with some relief, from Brexit to a major meeting between European and Asian leaders, made all the more important by President Trump's hostility to free trade. Theresa May had a meeting with Singapore's Prime Minister, one of the countries with which Britain would like to sign a free trade deal once out of the EU. And yet, here tomorrow, the EU will itself sign a free trade deal with Singapore, from which British industry will benefit, at least until we leave next year. James Mace, News at 10, Brussels.
The word at Westminster today was that the Prime Minister had managed to unite the pro- and anti-Brexit wings of her party with her idea of extending the transition period, except that they were united in opposition to it, not in approval. As one former minister put it, Theresa May is losing the confidence of colleagues of all shades of opinion. As for opinions amongst business people about where we are with Brexit, MPs were in Southampton today taking soundings.
Confused about where Britain's heading after Brexit? You're not alone. A group of MPs ventured to Southampton today to find out how this port is dealing with an uncertain future. £40 billion worth of exports leave the country through here every year. Would a little more time to prepare help? This senior Conservative who voted Remain isn't convinced.
I think we need certainty as soon as possible. I would rather see as limited as possible a transition period, and I hope very much we can get on to the next stage in our relationship with our European friends.
But among the exporters and business leaders they met, there were mixed views, some telling MPs a longer transition made sense.
Our members and our organisation, the Federation of Small Businesses, were calling for a minimum of 3 years to prepare for the inevitable Brexit. And we were disappointed when it was only 2 years, so we would welcome a 3-year transition.
In a city that voted leave, but not by a huge margin, opinion remains divided.
I think it's a benefit because I think staying in the EU for however long we can would only be of benefit to the country. But I do think it's just prolonging the inevitable.
I think they explain, but then they kind of backtrack their words and then they do something else and they're just so unclear. So, yeah, that's why we're all confused.
I think actually most of the politicians in Parliament don't want us to leave and the EU don't want us to leave, and they're doing everything they can so that we don't.
As a port, Southampton has long been used to adapting to a changing world. The idea that the transition period from Britain leaving the EU to being fully independent might take a little longer has mostly been met by a weary shrug. But at Westminster today, Tory MPs from both wings of the party were very far from relaxed.
To extend it further beyond the established period at considerable financial cost because of the new budgeting period seems to me to be a very grave error.
I mean, I've always had a problem with the transition period, which is that effectively we remain in the EU, subject to all of its rules, paying our full bill, and we don't have any vote at all. But now this extra year, that is actually going to cost us more.
For those trying to keep trade flowing, though, arguing about transition might seem a bit of a sideshow when nobody's told them what the final destination or final deal might eventually look like. Libby Vina, News at 10, Southampton.
And our political editor, Robert Peston, joins me now from Brussels. Robert, this was a summit which was billed as being a decisive or definitive moment, but do you think that at the end of it there is a deal which can still be done by the Prime Minister?
Well, let's be clear. What is the big stumbling block in terms of getting a deal is the EU's insistence on the Northern Ireland remaining in the customs union and the single market on its own in the event that we can't find other ways of keeping the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland open, and that for the Prime Minister is like introducing a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Now, her proposal, and make no mistake, it was her proposal to possibly extend the period when we are non-voting members of the EU in transition, might go some way to providing a solution. But it is not the whole solution. And talking to well-placed sources here, what they say is the only way that people can be confident that Northern Ireland will not be separated in that way is if the whole of the UK were to join the customs union. Now, not just for a backstop period, but actually permanently. That, for them, is the solution.
If that solution, Robert, was achievable by Theresa May in Brussels, she still then has to sell that deal back home.
Well, this is the problem. Politically for her, that solution is a nightmare because her Brexit-supporting MPs hate the idea of permanently being in the customs union. Why is that? Because it would make it impossible for the UK to do trade deals with other countries like China and America. So the problem for her is that a deal that can be done here is not a deal she can get through her own party. We are still on the fast train to crisis.
Indeed. Robert, thank you very much indeed. Our political editor, Robert Peston, in Brussels.